The fog rolled across the French countryside like a ghost unwilling to leave, thick and silver in the pre-dawn light. Sergeant Jake Morrison pressed his gloved hand against the cold steel of his Sherman tank, feeling the vibration of the idling engine through his fingertips. The metal was damp with condensation, slick and unforgiving. Around him, the 4th Armored Division's encampment at Arracourt stirred with the nervous energy of men who knew something was coming but couldn't yet see its shape. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Jake was 24 years old, though the war had aged him in ways that couldn't be measured in years. His face was lean, weathered by North African sun and Norman rain, and his eyes carried that particular 1,000-yard quality of someone who'd seen friends burned alive in metal coffins. He'd been a tank commander for 8 months now, and every morning he woke up surprised to still be breathing. "Sergeant Morrison, sir?" The voice belonged to Private Tommy Chun, his loader, a kid from San Francisco with quick hands and a quicker smile. Tommy emerged from the fog carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, steam rising from both. "Figured you'd need this. Radio chatter's been crazy since 0400. Jake accepted the cup, wrapping both hands around it for warmth. "What kind of chatter?" "Panzer movements. Lots of them." Tommy's smile had vanished. "Intelligence says the Germans are massing armor east of here. 5th Panzer Army, maybe more. They're calling it a counteroffensive." The coffee tasted like burnt copper, but it was hot. Jake drank it anyway, staring into the fog where the rising sun was trying to break through. Somewhere out there, beyond the orchards and the rolling hills, German tank commanders were drinking their own coffee, checking their own equipment, preparing for the same deadly ballet that had been choreographed across Europe for years now. "Get Wilson and Martinez," Jake said. "I want to check the transmission one more time, and tell them to load up extra AP rounds. If we're facing Panthers, we'll need every advantage we can get." Tommy nodded and disappeared into the fog. Jake finished his coffee in 3 long swallows, then climbed up onto his Sherman's hull. The tank had a name painted on its side in white letters, Iron Promise. It had been named by the previous crew, all of whom were dead now. Jake had thought about changing it, but superstition ran deep in armored divisions. You didn't mess with what worked, and Iron Promise had kept him alive through 3 major engagements. The Sherman was outmatched by German armor in almost every way that mattered. Its 75mm gun could barely penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any distance, while a Panther's 75mm could punch through a Sherman like tissue paper from 1,000 yards out. The Germans called Shermans Tommy Cookers because of how quickly they caught fire when hit. 5 Shermans for every Panther was the unofficial exchange rate, and even that was optimistic. But Jake had learned something in the deserts of Tunisia and the hedgerows of Normandy. Battles weren't won by the best equipment. They were won by the men who refused to quit when the math said they should. Corporal Danny Wilson appeared first, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that was somehow dirtier than his hands. He was the driver, a former mechanic from Detroit who could coax performance out of an engine that would make the manufacturer weep. He was 31, older than most of the crew, with a wife and 2 daughters waiting for him in Michigan. He carried their photo in his breast pocket, wrapped in waxed paper to keep it dry. "Transmission's solid," Wilson said, climbing up beside Jake. "She'll run all day if we need her to. But Jake, I heard about the Panthers. If they catch us in the open." "They won't catch us in the open," Jake interrupted, but his voice was gentler than his words. "We'll use the terrain. Stay mobile. Hit and fade." Private Luis Martinez emerged from the fog next, the gunner, 20 years old and the best shot Jake had ever seen. Martinez had grown up hunting in the mountains of New Mexico, and he had an instinctive understanding of angles, distance, and timing that couldn't be taught. He was quiet, methodical, and utterly fearless when he had crosshairs on a target. "Morning, Sarge," Martinez said, his breath visible in the cold air. Chun said, "We're expecting company." "Heavy company," Jake confirmed. He looked at the 3 men who formed his crew, these strangers who'd become closer than brothers. "Listen up. If the intelligence is right, we're going to be outnumbered and outgunned. Panthers have better armor, better guns, better optics. On paper, we shouldn't win this fight. He paused, letting that sink in. But paper doesn't account for what we have. Wilson knows this tank better than the engineers who built it. Martinez, you can put a round through a keyhole at 800 yards. Chun loads faster than anyone in the division. And I've kept us alive this long by being smarter than the bastards trying to kill us. Jake pulled out his map, spreading it across the Sherman's turret. The paper was worn, marked with pencil notations and coffee stains. Arracourt sits in a valley. There are 3 main approaches the Germans can use: the north road through the orchards, the eastern road along the ridgeline, and the southern route through the village. Command wants us holding the eastern approach with 2 other Shermans. Lieutenant Harper's tank and Sergeant Rodriguez's tank. 3 Shermans against how many Panthers? Wilson asked. Intelligence estimates a dozen. Maybe more. The silence that followed was heavy. Chun looked down at his boots. Martinez's jaw tightened. But Wilson, the oldest of them, the one with the most to lose, simply nodded. Then we'd better make every shot count, Wilson said. The fog was beginning to lift as the sun climbed higher. Jake could see the other tanks of their platoon now, dark shapes becoming solid in the growing light. Men were emerging from tents, pulling on gear, checking weapons. The camp was transforming from a place of rest into a machine of war, and Jake felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the mixture of fear and focus that came before battle. Lieutenant James Harper walked over, a tall man from Virginia with a West Point education and 3 months of combat experience. He was competent but green, the kind of officer who followed the manual even when reality demanded improvisation. Behind him came Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, a veteran of the Italian campaign with a scar across his left cheek and a reputation for aggressive tactics. Gentlemen, Harper said, his voice carrying the crisp formality of his training. We've received our orders. German armor is advancing on our position in strength. Fifth Panzer Army, supported by elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division. They're pushing hard to retake Arracourt and break through to the Moselle. Rodriguez spat into the dirt. How many? Reconnaissance reports at least 40 tanks in the main column, primarily Panzer IVs and Panthers. They'll be here within the hour. 40 tanks. The number hung in the air like smoke. Jake did the math automatically. 13 Shermans in their entire company against 40 German tanks, many of them Panthers. Even if every Sherman got off the first shot and made it count, they'd still be overwhelmed. Our orders are to hold the eastern approach, Harper continued. Morrison, Rodriguez, and my crew will establish a defensive line along the ridge. We use the terrain for cover, engage at maximum effective range, and fall back by stages if overwhelmed. The key is to delay them long enough for reinforcements to arrive from Nancy. When are those reinforcements expected? Jake asked. Harper hesitated. Unclear. The roads are congested with supply columns. Could be hours. Hours. They might not have hours. The briefing continued with technical details. Radio frequencies, fallback positions, recognition signals. But Jake's mind was already racing ahead, visualizing the battlefield, calculating angles and distances, thinking about how to turn their weaknesses into strengths. When Harper dismissed them, Jake gathered his crew one more time. The sun had finally burned through the fog, revealing a beautiful autumn morning. The French countryside rolled away in shades of gold and green, peaceful and pastoral. It was the kind of morning that made you forget there was a war on, until you remembered that beauty was often the setting for horror. One more thing, Jake said quietly. If this goes bad, if we get hit and the tank starts burning, you bail out immediately. Don't wait for orders, don't try to save the tank. Just get out. Promise me. They promised, though Jake knew that promises meant little when metal was screaming and flesh was burning. But it was important to say it, important to acknowledge that survival was the priority, even above duty. As they climbed into Iron Promise and began the drive to their defensive position, Jake thought about the letter he'd written the night before and left with the company chaplain. It was addressed to his younger sister in Oregon, the only family he had left. In it, he tried to explain what the war had taught him about courage and fear, about brotherhood and loss. He'd told her that he wasn't fighting for grand ideals anymore, if he ever had been. He was fighting for the men beside him, for Tommy and Danny and Luis, for the simple right to see another morning. The Sherman rumbled forward, tracks clanking, engine roaring. Behind them, the rest of the platoon followed. Ahead, somewhere beyond the ridge, the German tanks were coming. Jake pulled on his headset and keyed the intercom. "All right, Iron Promise. Let's go make history." The defensive position was better than Jake had hoped. The ridge ran east to west, a natural elevated line that gave them good sight lines across the valley below. Oak trees provided partial concealment, their autumn leaves still thick enough to break up the Sherman silhouette. Most importantly, the reverse slope behind them offered a retreat route if things went south. Jake positioned Iron Promise on the left side of the line, with Harper's tank in the center and Rodriguez's on the right. They were spaced about 70 yards apart, far enough that a single enemy shell couldn't take out multiple tanks, close enough for mutual support. Each crew worked quickly, using shovels and fallen branches to improve their concealment, digging shallow hull-down positions that would protect their lower hull and tracks. Wilson cut the engine, and suddenly the world was quiet except for the sound of distant artillery and the wind moving through the trees. Jake climbed out of the turret and used his binoculars to scan the valley. Fields of grain stretched toward the horizon, interrupted by stone walls and scattered farmhouses. A dirt road snaked through the center, pale brown against the green and gold landscape. That road was the Germans' most likely approach. "Martinez, you see that barn at 11 o'clock, about 1,200 yards out?" Jake called down into the turret. "I see it, Sarge. Range it. That's our first reference point. There's a stone wall at 1 o'clock, maybe 900 yards. Range that too. I want you familiar with every landmark between here and there." While Martinez worked with the gun sight, Jake studied the terrain with the eye of someone whose life depended on understanding it. The valley floor was relatively flat, which favored the Panthers' superior range and accuracy. But there were depressions and rises, small undulations that could hide a tank if used correctly. The key was to deny the Germans a clear, long-range engagement where their advantages would be decisive. Lieutenant Harper's voice crackled over the radio. "All Cobra units, this is Cobra 6. Report status." "Cobra 3 in position," Rodriguez answered. "Cobra 2 set," Jake replied. "Good. Hold fire until my command. We let them come in close, hit the lead tanks, then." Harper's transmission cut off as a new voice broke in, higher-pitched and urgent. All units, enemy armor sighted. Multiple contacts. Bearing 075, distance 4,000 yards and closing." Jake pressed the binoculars to his eyes, scanning the horizon. At first he saw nothing, just the peaceful valley. Then, emerging from a tree line like sharks breaching water, came the German tanks. Panthers. Lots of them. They advanced in a staggered formation, dark angular shapes that moved with surprising speed. Their long 75mm guns protruded like accusing fingers, and even at this distance Jake could see the tactical numbers painted on their turrets. He counted quickly, 12, 15, 18. More kept appearing. The intelligence estimate had been conservative. "Contact," Jake said into the radio, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I count at least 25 Panthers, advancing in formation toward the valley road." Harper's voice came back tight with tension. "Confirmed. All Cobra units, weapons tight. Let them close to 800 yards before engaging." 800 yards. At that range, the Sherman's 75mm gun had a chance of penetrating a Panther side armor, but frontal shots would be useless. They needed flank shots or hits on the weaker rear armor, which meant letting the enemy get close enough to kill them. Jake dropped back into the turret. The interior of the Sherman was cramped, smelling of oil and sweat and the metallic tang of ammunition. Martinez sat in the gunner's seat. I pressed to the periscope sight, hands on the traverse and elevation controls. Chun stood ready beside the breech, a 75mm round already cradled in his arms. Wilson, in the driver's compartment below, sat with his hands on the controls, ready to move the instant Jake gave the word. Range to targets? Jake asked. 3,000 yards and closing, Martinez replied. They're moving at about 15 miles per hour. Steady advance, confident. Of course they were confident. They had numerical superiority, better equipment, and they were veterans of the Eastern Front, where they destroyed entire Soviet tank armies. 3 Shermans on a ridge wouldn't even slow them down. Except Jake didn't plan to fight fair. Martinez, forget the frontal armor. We're going for track hits on the lead tanks. Immobilize them, create obstacles, slow down the advance. Track shots at 800 yards? Martinez's voice carried doubt. That's a small target, Sarge. You're the best gunner in the division. You can make it. Through the periscope, Jake watched the Panthers lumber closer. They were beautiful machines in their own terrible way, sleek and deadly, painted in ambush camouflage patterns. Each weighed 45 tons and carried a crew of 5 men, German men with families and fears, just like his own crew. But Jake had learned not to think about that. In combat, enemy tanks weren't people. They were problems to be solved, targets to be destroyed. 2,000 yards. The Panthers continued their advance, apparently unaware of the Shermans waiting on the ridge. Their formation was spreading out now, getting wider, which made sense tactically but also meant they'd be harder to concentrate fire on. 1,500 yards. Jake's mouth was dry. He wanted to order Wilson to start the engine, to be ready for immediate movement, but the sound would give away their position. Everything depended on surprise, on getting that first shot off before the Panthers knew they were there. 1,000 yards. Cobra 6, this is Cobra 2, Jake transmitted. Request permission to engage. A pause, then, negative Cobra 2. Wait for my command. Jake gritted his teeth. Harper was following doctrine, waiting for the textbook engagement range. But doctrine was written by people who'd never faced Panthers in combat. Every second they waited, the Germans got closer, more dangerous. 900 yards. Through gaps in the trees, Jake could see the lead Panther clearly now. Its commander was visible in the open turret hatch, scanning with binoculars. If that commander looked up at the ridge, if he saw the glint of sunlight on American steel. Cobra units, weapons free. Harper's voice finally rang out. Fire at will. Martinez, lead tank, track shot, fire when ready. Identified, Martinez said calmly. His hands moved with precision, adjusting the turret traverse, correcting for range and windage. On target, firing. The Sherman rocked back as the 75mm gun roared, the breech slamming back with violent force. The interior filled with acrid smoke. Before the shell even hit, Chun had the breech open, the spent casing clanging to the floor, a fresh round sliding home. Through the smoke and the ringing in his ears, Jake saw the tracer arc across the valley. The round struck low, hitting exactly where Martinez had aimed. The Panthers left track. Metal exploded, the track separated, and the 45-ton tank lurched to a halt, suddenly immobilized. Hit! Good shooting! Jake shouted. Next target, second tank. To their right, Harper's and Rodriguez's tanks opened fire in quick succession. Another Panther shuddered as a round struck its turret. No penetration, but the impact was enough to stun the crew. A third Panther burst into flames as Rodriguez scored a lucky hit on its engine deck. But the element of surprise was gone. The German response was immediate and overwhelming. Every Panther in the column rotated its turret toward the ridge, and the valley erupted with muzzle flashes. The air filled with the sound of incoming rounds, a rushing whoosh that ended in explosive impacts. A tree 30 yards from Iron Promise disintegrated, splinters flying like shrapnel. The ground heaved as shells struck the ridge, throwing up fountains of dirt and rock. Wilson, back us up. Reverse slope now, Jake commanded. The Sherman's engine roared to life, and they lurched backward, using the ridge as cover. Rounds screamed overhead, one passing so close Jake felt the displacement of air against his face. They dropped below the military crest, temporarily shielded from direct fire. Chun, load AP. Martinez, we're gonna pop up, take a shot, drop back down. Hull down tactics, fast as we can move. Over the radio, chaos. Harper's voice, strained. Took a hit. Turret traverse is damaged. Rodriguez, shouting coordinates. Another voice, unfamiliar, screaming that his tank was burning. Not Harper. Not Rodriguez. One of the other Shermans, positioned further south. Cobra 2, what's your status? Harper demanded. Operational, Jake replied. One hit confirmed. Returning to firing position. Wilson eased the Sherman forward until just the turret crested the ridge. Martinez already had the sight aligned, hunting for targets. The valley below had transformed into a hellscape. 3 Panthers were disabled or burning, but the rest had spread out, some advancing at speed while others had stopped to return fire. The immobilized Panther from Jake's first shot was now being used as cover by German infantry, Panzer Grenadiers who'd been riding on the tanks. Target? Panther, 11 o'clock. 800 yards, partial flank. Martinez called. Fire! Another roar, another shell downrange. This one caught the Panther as it turned, striking the junction between turret and hull. The German tank stopped dead, smoke pouring from its hatches. The crew began bailing out, tiny figures scrambling for cover. Hit, switching targets. But even as Martinez aligned on a new Panther, 3 German tanks focused their fire on Iron Promise. Jake saw the muzzle flashes and knew what was coming. Down. Down now. Wilson dropped them below the ridge just as rounds screamed through the space they'd occupied a second before. The Sherman rocked from near misses, dirt and debris raining down on the hull. Jake keyed the radio. Cobra 6, they're concentrating fire every time we shoot. We need to move positions between shots or they'll nail us. Concur, Harper replied. All units recommend shoot and scoot. Don't stay in one place. Easier said than done when there were 20-plus Panthers systematically trying to kill you. Wilson, next time we pop up, be ready to move laterally as soon as Martinez fires. Shift right, use that cluster of trees for concealment. Got it, Sarge. Jake risked a look through his periscope. The Panthers were advancing again, moving in pairs with one covering while the other moved forward. It was the kind of disciplined, tactical movement that spoke to experienced crews. These weren't green conscripts. These were veterans who'd survived the Eastern Front meat grinder. Up, Jake commanded. They crested the ridge. Martinez fired at a Panther that had pushed too far forward. Another hit, this one on the frontal glacis that didn't penetrate but cracked the armor. Wilson immediately pivoted the Sherman right, tracks churning, moving to a new position as return fire lashed their previous location. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter. Cobra 6, I'm engaging 3 Panthers on the south flank. They're trying to get around us. If the Germans flanked their position, it was over. The Shermans would be caught in a crossfire with no cover. Cobra 3, fall back to secondary position, Harper ordered. We'll cover your movement. Jake made a split-second decision. Cobra 6, this is Cobra 2. I'm moving to support Cobra 3. If those Panthers get through, they'll roll up the whole line. Pause. Jake didn't wait for permission. Wilson, hard right, get us to that stone wall, 300 yards south. The Sherman accelerated, bouncing over rough ground. Jake could see Rodriguez's tank now, smoke trailing from a hit to its rear deck, still moving but clearly damaged. Beyond it, 3 Panthers were advancing in a wedge formation, their guns elevated to fire over the stone wall Rodriguez was using for cover. Martinez, lead Panther, range 700, on target, fire. The shot caught the lead Panther in the side armor, the most vulnerable point. The round punched through, and Jake saw secondary explosions ripple through the tank's interior as ammunition cooked off. The Panther died spectacularly, turret lifting off its hull in a gout of flame and smoke. But the other 2 Panthers immediately swung toward Iron Promise. Contact front, Martinez yelled, and Jake saw the muzzle flashes simultaneously. Brace! The world exploded. The first round hit the ground in front of them, the impact lifting the Sherman's nose. The second struck their right side, slamming into the sponson armor. Metal screamed, the interior filled with smoke and the smell of scorched paint. Chun was thrown against the turret wall, blood streaming from his nose. "Damage report," Jake shouted over the ringing in his ears. "Sponson hit. No penetration," Wilson called back. "But something's wrong with the right track." Feeling sluggish. They'd been lucky. A few inches different and that round would have penetrated, killing them all. "Chun, you okay?" The private wiped blood from his face. Nodding. "Just rattled, Sarge. Ready to load." "Martinez, keep firing. We're not dead yet." Jake knew they should retreat, find cover, assess the damage. But Rodriguez was still engaged with that second Panther, and if Jake pulled back now, Rodriguez would be overwhelmed. "Target, second Panther." "Switching to he," Martinez called. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. High explosive rounds wouldn't penetrate armor, but they could damage optics, tracks, external equipment. Martinez fired, the he round bursting against the Panther's turret face. The German tank's gun elevated wildly, commander probably temporarily blinded. "AP loaded," Chin shouted. "Fire again." This time the armor-piercing round found its mark, catching the Panther in the turret ring. The German tank slewed sideways, turret frozen, effectively disabled. Over the radio, "Cobra 2. Good shooting. I'm clear." Rodriguez's relief was audible. But the battle was far from over. Jake did a quick tactical assessment. They'd knocked out or disabled maybe 8 Panthers, impressive, but the Germans still had numbers. An Iron Promise was damaged, mobility compromised. "All Cobra units, status report," Harper's voice demanded. "Cobra 3, operational but low on ammunition. Took 2 hits, but still in the fight." "Cobra 2, Jake replied. "Right track damaged, mobility at maybe 70%. Chen's injured but functional. We can still shoot." "Cobra 6, I've lost turret traverse," Harper admitted. "Manually traversing, but my rate of fire is way down." 3 damaged Shermans against somewhere between 12 and 15 still functional Panthers. The math was getting worse. Then Jake noticed something. The Panthers' advance had stalled. They were milling in the valley, some moving forward cautiously, others holding position. They'd expected an easy victory, a simple overrun of inferior American tanks. Instead, they'd lost nearly a third of their force in less than 20 minutes. They were reassessing. "Cobra 6, this is Cobra 2, Jake transmitted. "The Germans are confused. We've bloodied them badly. If we can hold another 30 minutes, make them pay for every yard, they might break off. Or they might regroup and crush us," Harper replied. But there was something like hope in his voice. Rodriguez broke in. "Then we make them pay. Every round counts. Make them remember Arracourt." Jake smiled grimly. Rodriguez was right. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but they had something the Germans didn't expect. The refusal to quit. "All right, Iron Promise," Jake said to his crew. "We're going to move to that depression at 10 o'clock. Set up for another shooting position. Wilson, can you get us there with that damaged track?" "I'll get us there, Sarge." "Martinez, Chen, good work. Let's do it again." As the Sherman lurched toward its new position, Jake caught sight of the valley spread below. Burning tanks, both German and American, sent black smoke spiraling into the clear autumn sky. The grain fields were torn up by tank tracks and shell impacts. The beautiful morning had become a nightmare of fire and steel. But they were still fighting, and sometimes that was enough. The Panthers began their second major push 40 minutes later. This time they were more cautious, using covering fire and concealment, advancing by bounds. But caution meant slower movement, which gave the Shermans more time to shoot. Jake had repositioned Iron Promise 3 more times, each movement a calculated risk between finding better angles and preserving their damaged track. The right side still moved, but with a grinding noise that made Wilson wince every time they shifted position. One more solid hit and they'd be completely immobilized. Chen's nose had stopped bleeding, but his face was swollen, one eye nearly shut. He refused medical attention, insisted he could still load rounds. Jake let him work, they needed every man functional. Through his periscope, Jake watched a pair of Panthers creep forward using a burning farm building for cover. They were learning, adapting their tactics. That was bad news. The longer this fight went on, the more the Germans' superior training and equipment would tell. Martinez, you see those two Panthers using the barn for cover? Affirmative. Difficult angle, Sarge. They're in defilade, only showing turret tops. Can you hit the barn itself? Bring it down on them? A pause while Martinez calculated. Maybe. He round structural weak point. Yeah, I can try. Do it. The high explosive round left the barrel with a different sound than armor piercing. A sharper crack. It struck the barn's corner, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the entire structure groaned, weakened walls collapsing inward. The Panthers tried to reverse, but one got caught under falling timbers and corrugated metal, its turret pinned. The other Panther cleared the collapse but found itself exposed. Rodriguez's tank put a round through its side armor before it could react. Outstanding! Harper's voice carried actual excitement. All units, use the environment. Make the terrain work for us. Jake allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then a new voice crackled over the radio. Command, several miles to the rear. All Cobra units, this is Sabre 6. Be advised, reinforcements are still delayed. Road congestion at Nancy is worse than expected. You need to hold for at least another hour. Another hour. Jake looked at his ammunition count. They'd started with 71 rounds. They were down to 23. Every tank in their small force would be running low by now. Sabre 6, Cobra 6 actual, Harper responded. Request immediate air support. We're engaging superior numbers with limited ammunition. Negative Cobra 6. All air assets are committed to operations north of Metz. You'll have to hold with what you have. No reinforcements. No air support. Just 3 damaged Shermans and whatever shells they had left. Jake keyed his crew's intercom. All right, we're low on ammo and we're alone. Every round has to count now. Martinez, no shots unless you're confident. Chun, check our remaining load. Tell me exactly what we have. Chun moved through the cramped space, counting. 18 AP rounds. 5 he Sarge. 23 rounds against however many Panthers were left. Call it 12, maybe 10 if they'd been luckier than Jake thought. The math still didn't work. Unless Jake studied the battlefield with fresh eyes, not looking for targets but for advantages. The Germans were being cautious now, which meant predictable. They'd avoid open ground, stick to cover, advance along specific routes, which meant Jake could predict where they'd go. Cobra 6, Cobra 2. I have an idea, but it's risky. I'm listening, Morrison. We're fighting defensive, reactive. They move, we shoot, they move again. We need to set an ambush. Force them into a kill zone. Harper was silent for a moment. What did you have in mind? There's a sunken road at grid reference 479er233. It's the obvious covered approach to our position. If we position one tank, mine, in direct line of sight to that road, we can catch multiple Panthers in enfilade as they advance through it. And if they figure out what you're doing, then I'm probably dead, Jake admitted. But if it works, we could knock out 3, 4 tanks in quick succession. That might be enough to break their attack. Rodriguez's voice broke in. I like it, but you'll need covering fire. I'll reposition to overwatch Morrison's position. Hit any Panthers that try to flank him. Cobra 6. What's your status? Jake asked. Still limited traverse. But I can hold the north approach, keep them from getting around us that way. It was a plan born from desperation, but desperation bred innovation. Jake waited for Harper to make the call. Do it, Harper finally said. Morrison, get into position. Rodriguez, cover him. If this works, drinks are on me when we get back to Nancy. If this works, Jake replied. I'm drinking the whole bar. Wilson moved them carefully toward the ambush position, nursing the damaged track. Every yard they covered made grinding noises that Jake was sure the Germans could hear. But they made it, settling into a small rise that gave them perfect line of sight down the sunken road. Engine off, Jake ordered. We wait silent. Martinez, precite the road at the point where it narrows. That's where they'll be most bunched up. They waited. 5 minutes felt like hours. 10 minutes was an eternity. Jake could hear his own breathing, loud in the quiet turret. Chun shifted nervously, making the metal creak. Martinez's "I never left the gun sight." Then, movement. The lead Panther appeared at the far end of the sunken road, moving cautiously. Then a second, the third. They were advancing in column, unable to spread out due to the high banks on either side of the road. Perfect. Jake let them come. His heart hammered against his ribs. Wait, not yet. For Panthers now, strung out along the road like beads on a string. The lead tank was almost at Martinez's precited point. Fire! The first round caught the lead Panther in the side, penetrating clean. The German tank lurched to a stop, blocking the road. The Panthers behind it were trapped, unable to advance or retreat quickly. Next target. Chun already had a fresh round loaded. Martinez traversed slightly, aimed at the second Panther. Fire. Hit. The German tank's ammunition detonated, the explosion massive in the confined space of the sunken road. Keep firing. Third shot, third Panther. This one got its engine but stayed mobile, trying to back out of the kill zone. Martinez put another round into it, and it ground to a halt, burning. The fourth Panther finally reversed out of the road, turret traversing frantically, looking for whoever was killing them. But Rodriguez had it in his sights. The hit came from an unexpected angle, and the Panther died without ever identifying its killer. For Panthers destroyed in less than 2 minutes. The Germans' attack along that axis was broken. But Iron Promise's position was now exposed. Every German tank in the valley knew exactly where they were. Jake saw muzzle flashes, counted at least 5 Panthers turning toward them. "Wilson, get us out. Reverse, emergency speed." The Sherman's engine screamed. They backed out of position just as the first rounds arrived, one passing through the space where their turret had been seconds before. Wilson spun them around, the damaged track protesting but holding, and they dropped into a gully that offered temporary protection. "Status," Jake demanded. We're okay, Chin panted. 15 rounds left, Sarge. 15 rounds. But they just destroyed 4 Panthers. The odds were evening. Over the radio, Harper's voice. "Cobra 2, that was brilliant. The Germans are pulling back, reorganizing. You just bought us time. Time. The one resource more precious than ammunition." Jake climbed partially out of the turret, risking a look at the battlefield. The Panthers were indeed pulling back, moving to the far side of the valley. They weren't retreating, this was a tactical withdrawal, preparation for another attack. But they were hesitating, reconsidering. 3 Shermans had just gutted a German armored column. Against all odds, against all expectations, they were